Meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. Although you don't look convinced. Meeting is now streaming live on YouTube.
Okay, cool. We're ready. Hello and welcome to our first fall presentation. Amidst remote learning, many robotics students have lost the opportunity to obtain hands-on experience. Therefore, FTC Team 14020 Nemesis Prime has been reaching out to professionals, asking to give presentations about themselves, their professional journey, and a fantastic topic about their specific profession. Today, we have Mr. Peter Wolfe, who is a software engineer specializing in security and coach to FRC Team 2590 Nemesis. In his free time, he enjoys playing tennis, volleyball, and most racket sports. Thank you for being here with us.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brady. So Mr. Brady asked me to cover a few introductory topics before the presentation portion here. And basically, so my job description, I'm a software engineer. So I started with digital equipment, DEC. DEC got bought by Compaq, Compaq got bought by HP, HP got purchased by, or HP split into HP Inc. and HP Enterprise. And so all during my career, when I started my career, I was what was called a pre-sales specialist in New York City. So you're representing the products, you're helping customers understand how your products work and how to deploy your products. So your technical support from the sales side of things. And about 4 years of that, I made a major switch, never looked back, moved to engineering. Best thing I ever did was move to engineering. So instead of supporting the product, you're actually building the product, right? And so you get direct input because you're actually coding it. So you're in the field and you're saying things like, gee, I wonder why the product does X. And on the engineering side, you're asking the field, what should the product do? How can I make it better? And you go to implement that stuff. Much more rewarding career from my perspective was that switch to engineering. So I switched to engineering 4 years in and have never looked back. And I've, basically went through all those companies almost without having to move my desk, right? Because it's been the same company, just different jobs in the company. So most recently, probably over the past approximately 10 years, specialized in software security. So software security, you're doing threat analysis for products, you're making sure products are secure. If products has vulnerabilities, you're figuring out how you're going to patch those vulnerabilities and get those patches quickly, out as quickly as possible to customers, or helping customers understand their overall vulnerabilities in their security architectures of how they're deploying your products. So that's a really ripe thing now with the internet and all you hear about all the security threats on the internet. And unfortunately, all those threats are really real. And so security expertise really has become very, very mainstream definitely over the past 10 years. So that was the answers to the first two questions that Mr. Brady asked. So basically, what does your job entail? And so I didn't complete. So as a security specialist, what do I specifically do? So in the most recent part of my career, I've been what's called a product owner. So if you guys read up on the agile software development methodology, you have the engineers doing coding, you have scrum masters managing small independent teams, and you have the product owners working with those teams to define the features that the product needs to have. So the product owners are kind of like the bridge between the paying customer and the engineering teams. You're defining, we're working on product X, it needs to do A, B, and C, and here's the acceptance criteria. You guys code it like this, we're gonna look, and as long as it does A, B, and C the way the customer wants, that's a good piece of code, let's ship that, and then let's work on the next kind of iteration of that code. You're trying to deliver constant improvement to your product at a nice cadence, instead of waiting 6 months or a year before you deliver some huge amount of functionality. So in the agile environment, you're trying to actually develop quickly, but in small little bite-sized chunks to kind of get that customer immediate value as quickly as possible. So my job was delivering specifically kind of those security features into my product, and being the product owner, defining what those security features needed to be by talking to our customers, right? And getting that feedback to understand how to enhance the products, and then working through that software lifecycle to get it built and delivered and tested and out to the customer. So Matt, you had an interesting thing here. Are there any norms, like if you go to college, like what determines your success in your career? And just before Mr. Brady and I were talking, definitely I found internships during college really valuable, right? So basically my career started in the 80s. So I was kind of in that very entry level when the IBM PC was becoming big. So PC style computing was becoming big. And I had some internships during my college years where I got to work on the original IBM PC and really got a lot of software expertise on things like, let's say, Lotus 123. Lotus 123 was the original bad boy kick-ass spreadsheet, right? It was way before Microsoft Excel, which later became the dominant spreadsheet. So Lotus was it. And I had a lot of experience doing Lotus, and I was actually, that was one of the things that got me hired. And I was able to use that expertise later with customers who are actually trying to use Lotus 123 in advanced ways, you know, in the finance industry, because that's what we were doing in New York City, was basically supporting banks and brokerage houses, insurance companies, was the finance district. So definitely take advantage of college internships. And of course, go to college, right? Not everyone is Bill Gates and can skip out of college and become a multimillionaire. That's a tough career path. I would not advise that. Stay in college 4 years, get a great education, then go out and get a great job. Okay, so we had a variety of choice. So I'm gonna pause there and see if there's any questions. So Matt, was there any questions about anything I just said?
Nothing has come up yet.
Okay. So we were kind of in a time box here. We had a variety of talks we can give. There was a really fun talk about software security, but it's very, very long. And we have a recorded version of that, which I will make available to Mr. Brady. And so that will be absolutely interesting to all the folks who are at Robbinsville High School, because it actually is related to high school security. But today I'm going to give, I wanted to go in a slightly different direction. I'm going to give you a talk on an aspect of software that you don't really tend to see in high school, and you usually don't even see it in college. You tend to see it when you're writing production software. So without further ado, I'm going to go into presentation mode here and share my screen with Mr. Brady. If I can find my Zoom meeting, there we go. So share screen, share computer sound. Got it. Okay, Matt, just give me a heads up that you can see my screen.
Yep.
And that's not where I wanted to start though. There we go. So I'm going to be talking about something today called internationalization and localization of software. And those are both two really long words. I'm intentionally not going to define them yet. I'm going to give you an example. And they are, it's I followed by 18 characters and an N, and L followed by 10 characters and an N. So those are abbreviated I18N and L10N. So when you hear people say I18N, L10N, they mean internationalization and localization. So originally this presentation was intended for a younger audience. So we're going to skip those first three bullets. I'm assuming you guys know mostly what software engineers do. And so out of curiosity though, how many folks are fluent in another language, specifically maybe an Asian language or anything interesting? Matt, do we have audio? Can we hear them, or they can only talk to you via chat?
Only chat.
Okay. So out of curiosity, how many attendees are either fluent in another language, and in particular, out of curiosity, any Asian languages? Anything, Matt?
Nope.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so I'm going to give an example here. Let's pretend you're writing a software system that's a simple example of an ordering system at your local McDonald's, right? So you're the clerk and you're looking at the cash register screen, and the customer's talking to you, and the customer says, "Hey, I'd like a Big Mac with lettuce and cheese. I'll have a Coke. I'll have medium fries." And the system, you know, the guy just is clicking on the buttons and it's totaling it up. I ended up owing $5.50. And I pay for this, and then the clerk goes to process the next customer, and he says, yes, I'm the clerk, I want to go to my next order, right? So a really simple user interface. So let's say that works wonderfully, and McDonald's is cruising along in the US, and you want to take that exact software system and deploy it in France. So what is wrong with it as is? Why can't I just pick that thing up, dump it in France, and be wildly successful? And I'll pause there. Anything, Matt? Mr. Brady and I have a discussion about the live streaming approach. Okay, so obviously the first obvious thing is it's in English, and there's a famous Steve Martin joke about this. It's not from a movie; it's one of his comedy albums. He goes, "Those darn French have a different word for everything." So obviously, if you deploy something in English in France, yeah, some folks in France might speak English, but I'm sure they would prefer that it was in their native tongue, right? And so so that's clearly broken, and we'll talk about how to fix that. But there's a whole host of other things there. I'm going to go back to the screen. There's a whole host of other things that would be broken in France if you look at that screen. Can folks look at that and pop into the chat and say, what else would I need to change probably if I wanted to deploy this in France? What things here are not going to work properly? And I'm looking to Matt to see if we get chat reactions. How many people are actually watching the live stream, Matt? Do you actually know? We have I think that's a 7. So 7 people on the live stream. Hop in that chat there. Tell me what's wrong with the system other than the English. Okay, you guys are very, very quiet today. Okay, so let's do the obvious things. The dates, the date and time format may or may not be different in France. Do French use dollars? Nope. So $sign's not going to work. Maybe the formatting here is not going to work. Something a lot more subtle. I very intentionally, under Big Mac, I have cheese, lettuce, onions, pickles, tomatoes. What is special about that list, right? And it's just by luck, it happens that Coke, Pepsi, Sprite is also special in that way. And fries is different, but this list is special in what way? I'll ask Mr. Brady. Mr. Brady, what's special about this list? Slightly special.
Belong to the Coke company?
No, like, sorry, I'm gonna mouse. What is special about this list? It's specifically the order of the list. CLOPT. Yes, it's an alphabetical order. If you were to translate these words into French, would this be the same alphabetical order?
No, it wouldn't be.
Probably not, right? I mean, just by luck, that might be true, but cheese is fromage in French. So yeah, the sort order is going to be different. So this thing is totally broken in France, right? It's just not going to fly. So that was what's wrong with it. Okay, so internationalization, the goal of internationalization is writing the software so it will work in international markets. And you don't want to change the software. You want to write the software once and have it be able to dynamically do the correct thing in any market you deploy it into. France, Germany, Switzerland, wherever you're going to lay this thing down, you want it to just work sight unseen. So that's the job of the software engineer, is to appropriately do the code right so it supports internationalization. And we're going to talk about how to do that. And then localization is actually kind of doing that grunt work of the translation, right? Like, you know, it's in English now, but I need to get it into French. So I need to find someone who speaks French and can translate the software for me, right? And have that be, and then test it appropriately, et cetera. And why should you care? Why not just ship it in English? And we kind of said Europe and Asia, they represent over 50% of the software market, right? So if you are not, you know, if you have a competitor and they are doing locale sensitive work, they are absolutely going to beat you out on any software that they're selling, because customers want to buy software that's friendly to their native locale, especially in Asia. It's like Japan and China especially prefer their software to be in Chinese or Japanese. They, you know, not everyone speaks English, or not necessarily fluently, and they are expecting out of most products that they're going to be appropriately internationalized and localized. Okay, so one simple way to fix this language issue is just take the code and translate it. So here's some pseudocode for what this program looked like. So remember, we asked that on the bottom of the screen, it says, do you want to place another order? So you would print that on the screen, and you would read from the keyboard or read from the screen waiting for an answer. You're going to put that in the answer variable, and you would lowercase that somewhere in your code. And then finally you'd say, hey, if the answer is Y or the answer is yes, then pay it and then go back to the top and do the next order, or else do whatever, right? So you have very simple code to just print it on screen. Well, I could just copy that code and then go into the code, you know, so I have the Spanish copy, and just translate the hard-coded text right into Spanish. ¿Quiere hacer otra orden, sí or no? Again, I would still read the answer, and this time I'd have to change the code. I have to look for S or C because it's Spanish, and then do the same thing. So I could do that. And there's obviously some incredibly serious problems with that approach. So out of curiosity, what is wrong with that kind of approach to translation? Matt is shaking his head. Guys on the live stream, make it interactive. It'd be more fun if you guys jump in and ask questions and make it interactive. So how many different versions of the software would I need to create if I were to take that approach? Well, it depends how many countries I want to deploy the software in. So maybe I want to do French, but there's Belgian French and Canadian French and French, and then there's flavors of Chinese. There's Cantonese. There's simplified Chinese, non-simplified Chinese, Czech, France, Germany, blah blah blah. Big long list, right? So you would end up creating that many copies of your program for each of these locales that you wanted to support, which is it's theoretically possible. You could do that. But another downside of that is you're touching the code, right? You're actually editing the code and recompiling the code to build another version of the product. So you really need an engineer to do that versus just a translator, someone who's just going to literally just look for the English and type the equivalent French, for example. So that's bad. You don't want to have to pay an engineer to do this work. And what if there's a bug? Forget the localization part or the internationalization part. What if there's some bug? How many times would you have to fix the bug? Well, if I had all the locales listed in that list there, I'd be fixing the one bug, 27 times. It would completely non-feasible to do it this way, right? Like this is not the right way to do it. And obviously, you're always going to be late. Like that English version, if you're still coding it and you're not done yet, you can't complete the translation and all these other locales. So you're going to always finish English first, and you're going to be in this race to try to get all those other locales done. Or maybe you're not going to ship to English till everything's done, so you could ship them all at once, or maybe you're going to ship English first and then the others come later. But you're going to always be stuck with that wait game, which is kind of a pain in the neck and not very manageable. So what's the right way to do it? So the right way to do it simplistically is a thing called message catalogs. Never hard code text in your program. Always put the text outside the user interface text, the stuff that people are going to see, customers are going to see, put it in what's called a message catalog. And then that's basically like a simple text file, and it's completely separate from the program. And then at runtime, the system is going to choose the proper catalog to use when running the program. So if I'm in Spain, it's going to use the Spanish catalog. And if I'm in the US, it's going to use the English catalog. And if I'm in France, I'm going to use the French catalog, et cetera. And maybe I'm in Germany and I don't have the German catalog. You'll have some kind of fallback. Either the user can say when he's in Germany, I want to be in French or Spanish or English, or just have it always fall back to English. You could have some default in that case, right? Because you're probably not going to support all locales right out of the gate. So you have to have some kind of default. But how does the system know my language? Well, it's based on your locale setting that you basically tell the system what your language is, and we'll talk about how to do that a little later. So let's look at some example code of what a message catalog would look like. So I'm going to create an English catalog to start, and I gave like a Windowsy kind of example here. So I created C:\McDonald's in English, that's my English locale, McDonald's.catalog, which is just a text file. And it's name value pairs. So I gave this string name chicken, and it's the string chicken McNuggets, and I have a string name hamburger, so this is the name, and it's Big Mac. Order underbar again, do you want to place another order? So that's the English catalog. And then I create the Spanish equivalent. So chicken would be Pollo McNuggets, hamburger Magnifica. And I think I made these names up. I don't remember checking if I checked the Spanish McDonald's to see if that was actually the name of a hamburger in Spain. And do you want to order again the Spanish translation of that, right? So now I have these two text files, and they have the appropriate locale sensitive text for those two examples. And what is the core program? What does your code look like now? So your code has this call. This is going to be an example in C, but the analogs are in Java, and any other time you're going to do this, there's essentially equivalent functionality in any language you're going to use. But in C, it's called set locale. And that's really a query to the system to say, what locale should I be in? What does the user say that I should be? Should I be German, French, English? What should I be for this instance of running the program? So let's say it returns English as an example. Then you get a pointer to the catalog with a call called cat open. So open the catalog, and you just tell it the name. You don't tell it the English catalog or the Spanish catalog, because again, that's set at the system level. So this call will look at the value of your locale, and it will say, let's say I'm set to English, and it will open the English catalog. And now I have a pointer, this catalog pointer to it. And then how do I get messages out of the catalog? It's a simple call catget. So I'm going to catget from that catalog the string order underbar again. So go look for that name in my catalog and get the string version of it, right? What's the translation of it? And then print it. So cat get of this thing, print it out. So that's going to print, do you want to place another order? So read the answer. And there's a clever little runtime trick here. There's actually a routine that says, if it's a yes, no question, this function knows how to do a yes, no question in each locale. So you don't have to say, is it Y or yes or S or C? It's a locale sensitive function. And you can just say, hey, is it true? Did it return true? Did the guy say yes? If he said yes, do X, else do Y, right? So that's kind of nice. Now, that's a really simple example because it was a really simple message. So realistically, a lot of messages might have parameters. They might be more complicated. So this message says disk D contains 5 files. And the idea is D and 5 are going to be set at runtime. That might say disk C contains 1,000 files or disk E contains 3 files, right? So these are substitutable parameters in the message. Well, it's not that hard to do that. So here's what the message catalog value would look like. You take the string and you put a token. And these, if you're used to C, these are kind of like the substitution tokens that you use in a standard printf in C to fill in runtime values. So I'm going to obviously fill in disk, whatever the name of the disk is, contains some number of files, right? So I'm going to replace those 2% S's with strings. And the pseudocode to do that is fetch this message out of the catalog, keep it in this variable. And sprintf is basically print to this string buffer in memory. So it's creating this output string, str, given an input string, message, and you just give it the parameters, right? So I'm gonna get them, so, and then when you're done, you're gonna print the value of string. And so that's gonna print out, for example, disk C contains 10 files. And if I was in the English locale, that would be the message in English, right? So pretty simple. Why might that works? Why might not that work in other locales? Right. This is a little more subtle. This is the hardest question we've asked. That exact same technique might not work well in France or Germany or Switzerland or some other locale. Any guesses as to why? Okay, because if you were to just leave it like that with %s, you're not letting the translator change the grammar or the order of the values in the message. Like in French, what if I don't want to say disk X contains Y files. I want to say there are X files on disk Y, right? I want to change the grammar because that's the right grammar for French. So you need to let the translator have that flexibility. And the way you do that is with positional parameters. Instead of just %s, you say %1s and %2s. And now when the translator moves that token in the string, in the French string, he can control the grammar. He can control it in a French-friendly way. And so now when I do that same bit of code, it will say, there are 10 files on disk C in French, right? So I changed the grammar of the message. And by similar token, you see a lot of programmers make this mistake. It's basically an IETNM bug. This is not the translation bug. This is the programmer screwed up, right? You're breaking the translator's ability to do his job. You're doing sentence construction. So you have 2 messages in the catalog, this thing that says disk X contains, and then a separate message in the catalog, Y files. And you're going to substitute parameters into those 2 messages and then concatenate them together, right? So at runtime in the code, you're just plugging these 2 text messages together. And again, you took all the control away from the translator. He can't rearrange the sentence now because you have hard coded this concatenation. That's a bug. So you really have to do it like we showed up above, right? Make it a single message with parameters that lets the translator have complete control. Okay, and I keep using that term locale, and so what is the locale? So that's the fancy name for you to be able to tell the system your language, your cultural specific data, any character set requirements. And so if you're on Microsoft Windows, for example, you can go to the control panel and you have these regional and optional language settings. And here's an example of that. These screen captures are probably pretty old. These are probably from Windows XP days. So they almost look identical on Windows 10. This UI really has not changed significantly. So you can see I have my PC here set to be English. And you can set like your preferred number format, what's your decimal symbol, how many digits after the decimal, what is the grouping character, is it a comma, whatever, for like thousands, what is my currency setting, US dollars, what is my desired time format, month, day, year, et cetera, et cetera. So all those things are locale sensitive, and you as a user can set them to be appropriate for your locale. So let's look at some of those locale sensitive examples. So if you're in the US, it's usually month, day, year. So October 7th, 1986 would be 10/7/86. In the UK, it's day, month, year. So it would be 7/10/86. And in Germany, same order as the UK, but the periods instead of slashes. So typically, especially for dates, the order is well defined for the specific locale, but the formatting is still flexible. Some people, they might put hyphens, they might put colons, they might expand the date out to a string, like oct as an abbreviation, for example. But the order is still the same, but formatting is flexible, sure. Japan is an interesting special case. The dates in Japan are based on the reign of the emperor. So 1990 was the second year of, now I don't speak Japanese, so I'm going to say Heisei, Heisei. But if anyone does speak Japanese wants to correct me, jump in. Showa, the previous era, ended in 89. And then so Heisei started January 8th in 89 as the new emperor took over. And this date format is routinely used by businesses in Japan. You'll also see Western formats used, but here was the Japanese example. And an interesting story here, it actually is based on Lotus 123. Lotus 123 had a feature that they added to let the user customize this era format. And the Japanese customers really disliked this intensely because they felt it was disrespectful. By letting the user customize it, it implied the emperor was going to die, right? So they didn't like thinking that the emperor was going to die, and Lotus, I believe, removed that feature from the product. So if the emperor ever did die, Lotus would actually have to re-release a version of their software to accommodate the new date format. Or they made it a hidden feature with some special documentation on how to go do it in that case, because the users didn't like to see it in their face as predicting the emperor's death. So again, interesting cultural things that come out of when you're developing different kinds of software for different countries. Number formats, you guys are probably very familiar with this one. The US and the UK, we would use thousand separator for us would be a comma. The decimal separator would be a period, but in Germany, it's the opposite. So you have the period for the thousand separator. Positive or negative might be, that symbol might be before or after the number. You even see that some places in the US. Currency formats, the symbol can vary, and where it is in the price or the value can also vary. So again, this slide is a little dated because I believe Austria now uses the euro, but Austria used to have its own native currency. I believe it was the shilling. So they would put that symbol before 2,50 in Austria. The French put the dollar sign after the number. Portugal puts the dollar sign in the middle of the number. And of course, in the US, we have it in the front, right? So depending where you are. Times are all over the map, 9:15 a.m., 09:15, colons, H, and sometimes you see 15 minutes, right? So you see times. Culture, even the time zones are culturally specific. So we would say EST on the East Coast, but if you were in Canada on the East Coast, HNE would be that abbreviation because they're spelling that out in French and abbreviating the French version of Eastern Standard Time. We talked about the sorting is very subtle, right? So sorting is very specific to each locale. So where you're going to sort, for example, where do the accent characters sort relative to the character without the accent? Certain examples, so Welsh, there's a special CH character, and it's just by definition sorts between C and D in Welsh. And German had an example like that. Sharp S sorts as SS. And I don't speak German, but sharp S looks like two S's. The glyph for that looks like two adjacent S's. So it kind of makes sense that it sorts as SS. And then you need, for each of these locales, you need a character set that supports that locale. And when computers were young, everything was in ASCII, this American Standard Code for Information Interchange. And so here's some ASCII characters. There was only 127 ASCII characters, so it was basically a 7-bit character set. And so I started at character 32. There's some control codes from 0 to 31 there. So those are non-printable characters. So ignore those, things like escape and stuff like that. So here's printable characters. So you can see numbers, some special characters, uppercase, lowercase, and that was it for ASCII. And obviously we grew out of that pretty quickly. And so then there are these other character sets like isolatin 1 and isolatin 2, added all the extra characters you need for like European locales, right? So upside down exclamation point is used in Spanish, the pound symbol in Britain, yen in Japan, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all, this is a 8-bit character set. So there's 256 possible characters in isolatin 1. And so basically isolatin 1 was Western European, North and South America, et cetera. There's isolatin 6 did Arabic and Greek and Hebrew, 7 and 8. Isolatin 15, right? So there's basically character sets that support all these special alphabets by these different countries. And they were all single byte character sets. So this was a mess, trying to map characters back and forth between character sets. You kind of had to store the fact, oh, this is a Danish file, and then you're trying to read it in English. You had to make sure you were using the Danish character set when you're displaying it in a different locale. Got really ugly. So almost all that nonsense has gone away with a new standard called Unicode. And you might have heard of subsets of that standard called like UTF-8 and UTF-16, which are translation formats for Unicode. So Unicode, theoretically, you know, ASCII and all those Latin things were limited to 256 characters. Unicode allows 4 billion characters. They're trying to think. I don't think they've defined more than 1 million glyphs, unique symbols in Unicode, because it had to be Chinese and Japanese and Korean. It's all the characters worldwide jammed into a single character set. And basically, obviously, with 4 billion possibilities, there's clearly room to do that. And even things like emojis are getting standardized and jammed into Unicode. Okay. So stepping back, you as a software engineer, what do you need to know when you're building software that's going to be used in different locales, right? What do you need to know about I18N? And so you have to be very aware of what data is language or culture specific. And we just gave a whole boatload of examples, right? So the actual text like English, French, German, currency, date, time, format, things like that. You need to understand that. Sort orders and things. So there's a lot of built-in runtime features in Java and C and C++ to help you deal with this. It's not like you need to invent this from scratch. There's built-in runtime things like string format time to take a time value, format it, given a time value, format it appropriately for a specific locale. Same thing for money, same thing for sort order. So use message catalogs and use these locale-sensitive library routines, right? And if you're a programmer testing this, one simple trick we used to do as programmers, you would take the program, you think you've done all your internationalization work, and you say you did that in English, and you're testing all your English catalog stuff, and it seems like it's working, but you've never tested Spanish. So you take your English catalog, you copy it over to the Spanish directory, take every single message and just stick a big thing like XXX, uppercase X, in front of every single string, right? And then put your system into Spanish mode, run your application, and every single string you see on the screen should say XXX and the English translation. So you know you picked up that message out of the Spanish message catalog. And if you see a string on the screen that should have been translated and it doesn't have XXX in front of it, that's a bug, right? You screwed up. You hard-coded a string. You didn't mean to screw up. So there's lots of simple things you can do like that for testing. Okay. So that was the internationalization part. That's the programmer's job. Now we come to localization, which is more of the procedural job. So someone on your team is going to go out and hire some translators. They need to find a bunch of people that speak all the languages that you want to translate to. You're going to hand those folks the message catalogs, and you probably have to tell them a little about your application space, right? Like if you're doing some weird technical thing, the translator might not even have the background to understand like the technical lingo. So you have to do a little bit of training sometimes, give them like vocabulary or a dictionary for them to understand, you know, the terminology or the technical jargon used in your application. And then they're going to go in and translate the message catalogs. We only talked about message catalogs. Everything we said obviously applies to the online help. If you have online help, customers are going to expect that to be translated. If you have hard copy documentation, they're going to expect that to be translated. You're going to take all that stuff together, and you're either going to ship it once and just say, it works worldwide. These are the locales I support. Or maybe you're going to package it and here's the French version of my product, here's the German version of my product, here's the Swiss version of my product. Typically, most products these days are not charging extra for internationalization. So typically they kind of package it all together for the locales that they support, one version of the product. And so that way the user might optionally, maybe he doesn't have enough disk space or something. He might say, oh, I'm a French customer. I don't need the English catalogs because I'm always going to be in French, right? So you might have some installation choices to let the user trim it down if he doesn't want all the various locales on his system. Okay. So Matt, do we have any questions in the chat so far about everything we said? Because we're going to switch tacks a little bit now.
The only question we got was who is Steve Martin?
Steve Martin is a famous comedian. He was on Saturday Night Live, famous stand-up comedian. He's probably been in movies that you've seen, although I wouldn't even try to guess what they were. But Google Steve Martin. If you had to pick one Steve Martin movie, Matt, I would pick The Jerk. Watch Steve Martin in The Jerk, or Google Steve Martin Saturday Night Live and watch some of his Saturday Night Live skits. Okay, so that was the easy stuff. So what if you're working on an application like Microsoft Word, right? Or Adobe InDesign or something that's doing lots and lots of text processing. So in English, okay, your text, if you're typing a sentence, it goes from left to right and top to bottom, but Japanese, Chinese, Korean, it goes the other way around. It's vertically and it's top to bottom, right to left. Pages start in the back of the book. Hebrew and Arabic are written horizontally, but right to left, top to bottom. Any numbers are written left to right, though. Fragments of Latin text might be left to right. So there's lots of interesting special cases for text processing in these locales. So here's I think this is a Japanese example. It could be Chinese. I think it's Japanese. So look at this headline. It's like a newspaper headline. And the headline reads from right to left. This text here also reads right to left, except the numbers, this is not 34.5%, this is 5.43% and 9.38%. So even in the middle of the line, there's some Latin stuff going the other direction from the way you're reading. The columnar stuff here is vertically top to bottom, right to left. And except they have this table down here, and for some reason, the table header seems like it reads left to right. So apparently, if you're a Japanese reader, this absolutely makes sense. You have no problems with this, but you're accustomed to having the directions change like that depending on the context. And if you were trying to type this stuff in, like things like the Latin languages like English, Spanish, French, they're pretty easy to type because you have a Spanish keyboard, you have a French keyboard, you have an English keyboard. Those keyboards favor the characters you're going to tend to type. Like you're not going to type, N with a tilde very often in English, but you type it all the time in Spanish. So there are custom keyboards. But typically, you look at the keys in your keyboard, 50 plus discrete things. So keyboard input is fine in those locales. But if you're trying to do stuff in, say, Chinese or Japanese or Korean, where you have these ideographic character sets, you can't, can you have a keyboard with 1,000 keys? So it turns out, and this is a demonstration, this is a Japanese typewriter. I apologize for the resolution, but it will be clear as they zoom in. And so the question was, can you have a keyboard with 1,000 keys? This is one, right? So a Japanese typewriter had that grid. It's like a lead block with the grid. And you're positioning one at a time to pick up one lead block at a time and have it strike the paper, right? So absolutely crazy, not the most productive thing. And then theoretically, if I remember how big that grid was, but it's at least it's bigger than 100 by 100. If you needed more characters, you could swap in a whole nother plate of characters, like another grid system would just plug in, take the current one out to use those other keys. You can imagine a pain in the neck to type like that. And more interesting way to do it is with a phonetic input method system, and we'll demo that at the end. So they lick that problem of having to have the crazy keyboard. The other thing you can do, especially for the ISO Latin characters, is you can learn special control sequences. If you want to type an A with an accent grave, an A with like the backtick, control, and these are for Windows. There'd be a Macintosh equivalent for this. So you can type all these fancy characters, even if you're not in that locale. You probably have seen the Windows equivalent and the Mac equivalent of a character map where you can just find it in a GUI and hit a specific character to get it to insert. So like PowerPoint and Word have both of those features built in. So that's user input. And again, we'll come back as a demo and input, an interesting input method at the very end. What about things like user interface design, right? So user interfaces, things like icons, right? Or UI elements that use images. And you have to think about those images though, because some of them are not culturally neutral. You have this image on the screen that really just doesn't work in all the locales where you need it to be. So here were some examples of, here's an icon that kind of represents a US rural mailbox. And that is not going to fly in a lot of countries. It just has no meaning. And what does flag up mean? I think 50% of the people in the US aren't sure what flag up means on their rural mailbox. What about those mailboxes, right? You have the blue mailbox in the US, the red mailbox in the UK. You know, if that was your icon, that's obviously not going to fly in either country. You're going to lose 50% of your audience. Color, even things like color are not uniform. They don't mean the same thing across different cultures. So red has this connotation of danger in the US, but in India, it connotes life and creativity. So that, you know, a red X meaning don't do that, or danger, don't touch this, that doesn't work in places like Egypt where red is not associated with that and X is not associated with forbiddance, right? It just doesn't work. You need to be culturally aware there. Here was an example. This is a real snip of a user interface, an old user interface, but it's in Hebrew. So it has what we call pull right menus. You pull down and then you pull to the right. Well, in Hebrew, it goes the other way. You have to pull the menu to the left. That's the way a Hebrew UI, you'd expect the UI to work in Hebrew because you're reading in that direction. And so, yeah, so this UI was smart enough to have the pull right menu be a pull left menu when it was when you were in Hebrew mode. Okay. So what are the other hard, so here again, MS Word, we're not going to talk about these in detail, but the other hard stuff to do, spell checking. You know, I need a French dictionary, a Spanish dictionary, a Chinese dictionary. You need something to check the spelling against, and even the grammar checker, right? All those rules are very locale specific, so that's pretty interesting. Hyphenation rules can be different across the different locales. Thesaurus, same thing as the dictionary stuff, right? You need to look something up in a thesaurus. You need a thesaurus for that particular locale. So a lot of work there building an application like MS Word. Okay, any questions, Matt? Okay, so for last thing, I have a fun little demo. So I'm going to show you this in Windows, and I want you to see it. So I'm going to move this to my other side of my screen. So I'm going to bring up Notepad. And you see down in my lower, where my mouse is in my lower left, it says Ing for English. If I click on that, these are where I can select my input methods. So this is saying I'm currently using English. I can switch to Spanish. I can switch to Japanese or Chinese. I'm going to switch to Japanese. And this little icon here is saying, hey, if I'm typing here, I'm just typing text like Latin text. But if I'm typing now, I'm using an input method that's a phonetic input method. And again, I don't speak Japanese, so I have my little cheat sheet here. So here I am in Notepad, and I'm going to type the phonetic pronunciation of the number 1 in Japanese, which is ichi. So I'm going to type ichi, and it didn't do what I wanted it to do, or maybe it did. I-C-H-I. It's supposed to give me a beautiful selection. So hold on, do that. Right-click that. Come on, Japanese, you can do it. I-C-H-I. Oh, the story of my life. Okay, I'm going to type ni. Nope, that didn't work either. What the heck? I am in Japanese, right? Yep, that says Japanese. Good, Japanese check. I'm here. Huh. Ichi. It's putting like hiragana on the screen. I want it to do kanji. Gosh darn. Okay, I give up. I'm going to exit out of Notepad there. I'm going to save what I have, and I'm just going to run Notepad again, hoping it gets better. Hello, Mr. Notepad. Let's try that again. Here we go. And I'm going to make this font bigger so you guys can see. So that's options, edit. I don't even know where it is now. Oh, no, bad. That's Emacs, not what I wanted. Open with Notepad. I don't know if Emacs has all these fancy features. Okay, so if I type here, it's just letters, got it, like that. Switch it into input mode, and I'm hoping I can just type Ichi. There we go. That's what I want to see, that pop-up thing. So I type in the phonetics, and then Ichi is the beginning of many different words. And if we read Japanese, you know, this would say Ichi something else, Ichi the third thing. And now it's up to you to pick the right thing that Ichi is. Okay, so Ichi, that is the number one. Ni is number two. And there it is, number two. San is number three. Boom. That's number three. Okay, remember in my presentation, I'm going to sneak over here for a second. I gave that example of the reign of the emperor, which is this character, Hisei or Hisi. I don't know how to actually pronounce that in Japanese, but I'm going to type that phonetic pronunciation. So H-E-I-S-E-I, and you can see that that is that character, right? So just typing in that phonetic, that means like the era, E-R-A, era of the emperor. And then Nippon, in Japanese, you would say Nippon or Nihon for the word Japan. And so I'm going to just type that. I'm going to type Nippon, and it's that guy. So that is Japan. And then Nihongo is Japanese. So Japan versus Japanese. And unless, that's why I asked you if you had spoken Asian language, right? Because if you don't speak an Asian language, I could just be lying to you and saying, oh, of course this means Japanese. I could just be making it all up. Whereas if you do speak some Asian language, usually you can keep me honest. Sure. So for the last one, I'm going to do Nihongo, and you can see it's Nihon plus that extra glyph there, right? So yeah, so that's supposed to apparently be Japanese, according to my wife and my daughters who both took Japanese. Well, my wife speaks Japanese, and Kira took Japanese in college, so I had this vetted by them before giving the demo. And so that's a phonetic input method. There are other input methods. There are things where you could actually, you know, with a tablet or something, you could do strokes. It could try to do like handwriting recognition to actually do the character. So that I've never seen that in action, but I know it exists. I'm not sure if it's built into Windows and Macs and stuff, but you can check. And if anyone is on the line who has actually used those kinds of input methods, please just jump in the chat and tell us if you actually tried that and it works. So Matt, that was the end of my formal presentation about internationalization and localization.
So I guess if anyone has any questions, you can post it in the YouTube chat, on the Trocider chat, and we will wait for your comments.
Okay, and Matt, I did not record on my end, so I'm hoping you recorded.
Yes, I did. I'll actually stop my recording for this.
Oh, while we're waiting for questions, I showed you the old screen captures. I'm going to type region. So I'm running Windows 10. And so you get to this region settings dialog box. I'll go to additional date and time. And you can see that pretty much it ends up being almost that exact same UI from Windows XP. So numbers, currency, time, date formats, right? You set them in a locale specific way. So basically the system knows the locale you set it to. And even things like your browser, you can override it. You can go in your browser, you know, I'm on an English system right now, even though I have these other input methods to support the other locales, Windows even would let you have your UI in Japanese. The entire Windows UI can be in Japanese or Chinese or French or Spanish. But you could also say be English like I am now, but say, but my browser is French. And by default, if the website supported French pages, the pages would be displayed in French. So that's one way. You also see websites where the website itself gives you a language selection, right? So you can actually say, go to a German website and it's in German, but you don't speak German well enough. So instead of using Google Translate, there's sometimes a pull down on the menu of the website that says, oh, show me those pages in English because they're available. And so that's also possible. So you can express a preference in your browser to get a language, to get websites displayed by default in a particular locale, or you could actually sometimes override that if the website supports it. Again, so not something you do routinely in college or high school because you're writing, it tends to be when you're writing production code that customers are paying money for, right? Like it has to be an application that needs to be internationalized. Not everything needs to be internationalized, although the rule, like in the old days, the general rule was your application was the installation procedure didn't need to be. And the thinking there was, well, the grunt guys who actually do the software installation, they mostly speak English, and you didn't want to invest basically spending more money on the installation procedure. That's probably not really a fair statement, and so some installation procedures are indeed localized, but those were some decisions we made in the early days about certain kinds of applications. I actually did work on an application when I first started in engineering that was like MS Word. It did have to deal with all this crazy character direction and kind of do Japanese spell checking and all this stuff. That was a lot of work actually to build that kind of application. And for more vanilla applications where you're not dealing with text, crazy you're not editing text like a text editor, it's a little more straightforward, right? You're just worried about writing direction and things like that. And the date and the time formats or sorting. That stuff is pretty manageable.
Well, unfortunately, it doesn't look like we have any questions up right now. So do you have any other last words of wisdom you'd like to impart us with?
Go forth and conquer. No, nothing in particular at this time.
Well, I do want to thank you, Mr. Wolfe, for talking about adapting information for an international audience. Honestly, I thought about translating information, but we have to now consider accents, character sets, and even the direction of writing. I never would even considered that. We even get these images and color meanings different. So if we use one color in another country, it means something completely different. So it seems like this profession really seems to require a large need for cultural awareness.
Yep. Yeah.
But I actually like the whole phonetic input method. I might have to use that for talking to family in Korea. So that sounds like a really cool thing.
Okay.
So I hope you guys join us on the 25th. So September 25th, Mark Martinez, who is a software engineer and data scientist who graduated from Harvard in applied math and in biology, and also went to Princeton, who graduated with an MSc in computer science. We'll be talking about deep learning, Grand Theft Auto, and self-driving cars. So I hope you guys join us on the 25th at 7 p.m.